will make this recording available for the talk duration. We will not record the conversation after. Okay, so Janna, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think this is a wonderful webinar series. I'm really happy to be able to take part. I'm just going to try and get my slides to work properly and then check that that's working. So, Anita, is that working?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, good. So the project that I'm going to be talking about today, the Mental Functioning Ontology project, is a really, really young project, and we've just been kind of working at that for the past year or so, really. And so a lot of what I'm going to say today is more along the lines of what we want to do rather than what's already there. But it also means that any feedback which we get at this stage can really go straight into improving what we do. So I think that's a really good opportunity to talk to this forum. So at the EBI, at the European Bioinformatics Institute, I actually work on chemical ontology. And one of the reasons which I got interested in mental functioning and emotions is really because it would be great to be able to categorize the things that chemicals do in humans. So we try to do a good representation of the ways that drugs act kind of biologically and of the things that drugs do, kind of the effects that they have. And quite a lot of chemicals act in various ways in humans. I mean, a lot of them are metabolites and some of them are drugs. It's not only about drugs. They act to affect or change mental functioning in some way. So I think there are about maybe somewhere close to 150 that have already been annotated within KEBI as having some effect on mental functioning, but we don't have a good way to say what the effect is. So that's just an introduction to how I ended up being involved in these rather diverse esoteric areas of ontology, but I'm enjoying having these different focuses. So a lot of people are trying to research how mental functioning works, and it's really crossed a lot of different disciplines and a lot of different methods. So in biology, you have your traditional mouse or other organism models, and you kind of develop ideas for tests that you can do on these animals to assess something like their mental functioning and then try to extrapolate to human functioning. And I, of course, won't say anything about neuroscience because I'm speaking to the experts, but on the other end of the spectrum, there's all sorts of medical research scenarios where things like questionnaires or clinical interviews or various sorts of patient medical profiling techniques are used to investigate mental functioning. And at the moment, this kind of really diverse different perspectives in different disciplines are quite divergent. So of course, we're united by human language, but human language is quite difficult for computers to use to kind of integrate different perspectives. And one of the things which humans get from language, which computers don't, are kind of what's involved in various. So typically, if a particular, let's say, disease or disorder of functioning is mentioned in the patient report in the medical case study, then everybody who is experienced in the of disorders of that type knows what sort of things could be going wrong. They know that in this case, the Capgras delusion, which is this rather dreadful and thankfully rare but stunningly weird delusion which recurs in which people think that somebody close to them has been abducted or replaced, and in some cases go as far as murdering the imposter, which of course is very tragic. And so the clinicians or the researchers working with this kind of disorder are able to sort of assess, well, it could be faulty perception, it could be faulty reasoning processes, could be something wrong with the emotions, but there's at the moment no way for computers to kind of help with organizing the data that's growing in all of these various different disciplines in such a way that the computer can help the researcher sensibly to get answers to that sort of question. So there are lots of vocabularies which define text, make text definitions, and not always compatible text definitions, and that's also a problem, but it's not the same problem for these types of syndromes, for mental disorders, mental diseases, and all aspects of mental functioning. And this is just a list of some of them coming out of Bioportal for Capgras syndrome, and the list goes on, off the page, so there are really quite a lot of hits. But none of them include something like a computable definition which would allow the computer system to do something more intelligent than just represent what a human could read and understand. So the goal of the mental functioning ontology is to try to bridge that gap in a couple of different ways, and I'll go into more detail about how we foresee the ontology helping with science or with scientific research, that where it comes to aggregation and annotation of data. But just to start off with, so the basics are that it's a modular ontology being developed beneath the basic formal ontology and a couple of other mid-level ontologies, and it's covering, so what you're looking at the moment are the kind of very high-level terms which have been included. There's things like mental process and cognitive representation and disposition, and how they kind of align to the upper-level basic formal ontology. So that plugs the ontology into the growing collection of bio-ontologies within the OverFoundry library collection. And that we think that's a good thing, because that helps to enable the ontology to work together with other ontologies such as KEBI and the gene ontology. So as I said, it's kind of a modular project, and each module will have a specific focus, and to some extent different people will be responsible for different modules. So of course, BFO is already existing ontology and under development by a team of people who work on it. And the same can be said for the ontology for general medical science, which is, I think, also Buffalo-based, but I'm not involved in that at all. And then there will be modules for mental functioning and mental disease, separately to the kind of normal mental functioning. And of course the emotion module is the one which I'm most involved in, because my position in Switzerland is in the Research Center for Affective Sciences, which is really just noticing emotion and emotional things. So yes, so each module will be interrelated by ontology input, and the whole lot you can load all of them together into Protégé or some other ontology browsing tool and look at how they relate to each other. But the modular development fixes the scope for each ontology project and they don't overlap. Okay, so a little bit about why we want to do this and what we hope to achieve at the end of the project. The biontology effort has grown, I think, probably primarily out of the bioinformatics community, where there are simply lots and lots of databases and lots of data in those databases, and it became absolutely essential to have standardization of vocabulary across different databases, to have that allow for hierarchical organization, so that you can group together different genes, for example, based on shared functions at different levels. Community adoption of shared ontologies was really important, and it's more and more moving to kind of harness the potential of the artificial intelligence logic-based reasoning community's efforts to make kind of tractable, fast reasonings for logic-based formalism, so that you can say more in the languages that are used and have that be comprehensible, as it were, by the computers. So I think that's going in an exciting direction. And finally, another area which is also fairly recent in the biontology community is the bridging relationships between different ontologies. So I'll try to show what I mean for each of these points in the coming slides. So the first thing I think, again, for you folks that this should be absolutely not news, is that a lot of scientific research in the modern world that we find ourselves in relies on computational support, and it relies on data. And this data has to be, with each research question, it has to be sort of synthesized in some fashion that makes sense for the research question, and then analyzed, and finally some result determined based on the analysis. And this is probably perfectly tractable to keep doing kind of every time a research project comes up, but it saves a lot of time, a lot of research assistant time, if it can be somehow automated or made a bit easier to integrate these different sorts of data in advance, so that the retrieval process can be much easier. So having an ontology for standardization across different sorts of data is a really good thing, and some of the ways in which that works is, for example, if you use semantics-free identifiers, then you can change the label of your term without kind of affecting the annotations in the database, without having to go back and rewrite them. And if you preserve the identifiers once they've been used, good practices for ontologies that are going to be used for annotation means that at the end of the day, this integration project becomes a bit easier if you use this type of ontology for standardization. So synonyms and comments and definitions and all sorts of other metadata can then become associated with the ontology term, and they can be used in applications such as better searching. And once you've got those kind of semantics-free IDs for the things that can be occurring in the databases, then if you go ahead and use them in different databases, you have really straightforward lexical matching for integration. So that's a really good thing, because matching on different variants or spellings of names of these things is a nightmare, basically. So the second thing that I mentioned was the hierarchical organization. And I think here this is something where, again, the gene ontology has taught us a lot, because quite a lot of the interesting applications of the gene ontology for kind of science beyond data integration rely somehow on the hierarchical organization, because it means that you can do aggregation at different levels. So you can differentiate between, say, substance addiction and process addiction, that's one level. Or you can just look at all addictions, and that's a different level. That's, you know, you're going to have a bigger group at the higher level. Or you can look at, I don't know, all substance-involving disorders and so on and so on. So the hierarchical organization is the basic idea of classifying, and I think that most modern ontologies do provide a good hierarchical organization, which makes sense from a science point of view, but we're certainly going to aim to do that for the mental functioning ontology. So one of the things which we've looked at a little bit is different types of addiction, and we did that because we're going to be presenting on the topic of addiction at this year's ICBO conference in Graz in July. And so what you're looking at the moment is a hierarchy of types of addiction, and so the basic idea is that once you have this sort of hierarchy, then you can do the inference. You know, if your data is annotated to the lowest level, it's also annotated to all the parents. So again, probably not news, but a very useful thing which doesn't exist at present for this domain. So that's what we're going to try to do across the board for lots of other different application scenarios or aspects of the domain. So then there's the aspect of community agreement, and I think this is it's a very tricky thing to negotiate, because you always have a lot of different perspectives, and people feel sometimes that they can't get the responsiveness they need from an external project, so they don't want to rely on an external project, they don't want to agree to somebody else's idea of what is a good ontology for the domain. But certainly it would be, I think, something valuable if there could be a community shared ontology in this domain, and I hope that we will evolve collaboratively in that direction. Because once you have lots of different databases and lots of different ways that those databases can be structured, if the ontology lives kind of outside the databases and is linked to database records via annotations, then the same ontology can give you access to lots of different databases. So I took some examples from BrainMap. I looked at how addiction was, how you could search for results pertaining to addiction in BrainMap, just because BrainMap is great, and it's the only database that I found that had really substantial amounts of curated data in the functional imaging domain. There are others, but I didn't find them. So I looked to try to kind of aggregate, to make a search that would, to compose a search that would aggregate everything of relevance to addiction in BrainMap, and I took screenshots of that process. So pathological gambling is one of the predefined search criteria, as is alcoholism, and there are lots of keywords which have something to do with addiction, so alcohol abuse, dependence, drug addiction, and there are a few others, but I don't think that there was, let's say, one way to just say, I want every BrainMap entry with relevance to addiction and get that out kind of easily. So that would be the sort of functionality that we'd be wanting to build. If we associate mental functioning ontology terms through annotations to BrainMap at the level, let's say, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, all of those different lower levels, the hierarchical structure would give us a way to pull out everything for addiction. Thanks, Angie. I'll read your comment properly when I'm done, because it kind of disappears off the screen at the moment. So, but yes. So we think that would be a really useful functionality to have within the context of the broader perspective, not just looking at one type of data, but looking at more than one type of data and being able to kind of access those aggregated levels of description. So Wikipedia says that the Neuroscience Information Framework database list has 2,200 databases relevant to neuroscience, which I was quite impressed by. But I think not all of them have kind of searchable, curated data, which should be linked to the mental functioning ontology, but it's certainly still quite an impressive list for us to work on, and a big objective which will probably keep me busy for years and years and years. Anyway, so again, just picking some of those different databases and saying again that the objective would be something like the gene ontology annotation database, which is exactly that. It's a database purely of annotations from ontology terms to other data in other people's databases. So some of it is coming from the model organism databases, and some of it is coming from protein research groups and various different places all over the world, but they all stick their annotations into the same annotation database, and then it's searchable by everybody in the same way. Okay, so moving beyond the kind of databases and data integration, there's something more we think doesn't exist yet, which we'd like to add, which is the kind of relationships between mental functioning terms. So when you have a particular condition, that condition is characterized by symptoms of various sorts. There isn't always a straightforward way for a computer to automatically get from an annotation of a condition to an inference that at least some of those symptoms must have been present, and to be able to infer something about data that might be relevant where the same symptoms are present, but maybe it isn't annotated the same overarching condition. So again, looking at an example from addiction, we could, for example, be interested in the fact that, well, substance addiction has symptoms, at least some of the symptoms are preoccupation with substance use, and that is definitely, or at least we would make the assertion, something along the lines of that is a non-canonical thinking process. So this person is unable to control their own thinking, and they're just thinking about that substance use all the time. And we would make the assertion that failed attempts to stop substance use is a non-canonical planning process, and non-canonical thinking and planning are the kinds of things that are shared across lots of different disorders, but not every disorder. So these types of symptom perspective classifications would allow data to be grouped together at a different level to just the overarching disorder, which in this case is addiction. So those relationships, you make them in the ontology, you don't have to make them in the data. So the data itself can be annotated just to the most relevant ontology term, and then the inferences the computer can make based on the relationships which are asserted in the ontology. So we're hoping to do that for at least affective disorders, so emotions and the affect are the main focus at the moment, and disorders relating to substance very directly, like addiction, because that of course links back to the chemicals. But the idea would be that the framework could be extended by other interested if they want to do the same thing for other disorders which were more relevant for their research. And we hope that once we've shown that we can do it, that it works, that would then go on and be filled out so that it was a bit more comprehensive in scope. Okay, so then the next kind of thing on my wish list or to-do list is kind of different types of data and different levels of granularity, and achieving something like a knowledge base which allows you to kind of move sensibly in a computable fashion from one level to another. So the examples on the screen at the moment are all from kind of bioinformatics, because that's certainly a lot of the data that we have that we need to annotate is coming from different bioinformatics databases. So for example, there's cocaine addiction showing up in the pathway context, and there's a lot of knowledge, a lot of kind of detailed biological knowledge is captured in pathways and models of biological processes. And again, it's simply the case that if you try to search for all pathways that are relevant to addiction, you just can't get to them. And yes, so other types of data, metabolic data, gene expression data. So here we have just a very specific example that, for example, if you take urine and then you do an NMR, then an addicted person or a person who's using a particular substance, a lot of information in their urine about the substance that they've used and about other downstream effects that the substance has had on the various biological processes. But at the moment you can't do a search and retrieve the sensible reference spectra that you can compare your patient's data to unless you have really detailed knowledge of how the metabolic data is organized. So because there's no mental functioning and mental disorder specific ontology which is linked in some way to this level of description, this level of granularity, it's just really hard to do at the moment. So what we would hope to do would be to make these cross-ontology links which let you go, for example, from addiction in the first instance, but via the type of addiction, being cocaine addiction in this case, just as an example, all the way through to the Kebi chemical cocaine, which then is annotated. So Kebi is annotated in metabolic databases. And so you can get to all the things like the metabolites of cocaine and the spectra, or the gene expression data or the pathway data, because the Kebi annotation is already used in those databases. But the same thing would apply to jump into biological processes. So I don't have an example of biological processes here, but gene ontology biological processes are often annotated to pathways, and if we can connect those up with these cross-ontology relationships, then we'd be able to retrieve the relevant pathways and so on. Okay, so much for the aims and objectives of the project. Now I'll say just a little bit about what we're already got in the emotion ontology, which is one of the modules of the mental functioning ontology. So the emotion ontology extends the mental functioning ontology with emotion-specific terminology, and this is just the higher levels of that that you're looking at the moment. So some of the things which are, so we're focusing on kind of, in the first case we're focusing on what they call kind of process or occurrent emotions. Of course we could focus on, at a later stage we could incorporate that to include an assessment or making an ontology of emotional personality types or other sorts of things which are of relevance for emotion. But in the first case we're focusing on actual processes of emotion as they are happening, and in this case, you know, like somebody getting angry, somebody becoming very sad, somebody grieving, and that's the sort of things that our focus is on. And emotions have several components, some of which are, one of which is the appraisal, which is a kind of judgment about what's happened that sort of triggers the emotion. And other components are action tendencies and subjective feeling and physiological changes which happen, like heart beating faster, behavior like getting a new expression on your face, looking horrified or something like that. So we've annotated, you probably can't read many of these, but different examples of the sorts of emotion that people can get, and this list of emotions that we're working from is coming from a kind of textbook, the Oxford Companion to Emotion and the Affective Sciences. So we're just trying to get in a comprehensive list of different emotions. These do have multilingual synonyms associated with them, but well, in many cases, not in all cases. But there are, of course, some difficulties with emotion words not translating perfectly across cultures, which we haven't fully addressed yet. But anyway, there are some representative emotions already included in the ontology. Something which we're working on is getting in the kind of knowledge that we have about emotions in an ontologically correct way. So we can't say that all emotions that are fear necessarily involve the appraisal that something is dangerous, because some people just become irrationally frightened sometimes when there's nothing dangerous at all. So we're going to annotate what are going to be called canonical emotions. These canonical emotions are defined as, the prototype or the representative cases of emotion. And then we can say, for example, canonical fear does result from an appraisal of dangerous. So canonical fear results in a fight or flight action tendency, typically having a characteristically fearful facial expression, and that facial expression can then be used to annotate the databases which store samples of those images for use in research. So that should be able to be kind of linked up as part of the annotation to the ontology. So just amusing aside, example of a non-canonical fear would be intense fear of seagulls. So that, and various other strange phobias would be examples of non-canonical fears. Okay, so appraisal is quite central to some of the distinctions involved in which emotion is taking place. And we've annotated quite a few different types of appraisal. In each of these cases, the different well, for some of these, there's more in the ontology underneath. You can see that one is a little plus. I didn't expand everything and get it onto one slide. So there are also types of subjective feeling. So subjective feeling is the kind of what the person would report as experiencing, as feeling. So, I'm feeling nervous, I'm feeling calm. There are, we've annotated different types of physiological responses to emotions, such as, heart beating faster, or blushing, or relaxing. And again, these are purely being chosen based on what has been already used in research at the center that I'm employed by, but of course we would be completely open to including further examples depending on any other use case, such as database annotation. Okay, and finally, emotional behavior. So Anita said, what about animal responses like freezing? Yes, exactly. So I think staying still is a behavior, amazingly. So staying still is a behavior. There it is on the screen. And that's really interesting because, of course, it's used in animal models. So I was speaking to somebody who has a fish database, and they told me that the fish, I guess it was zebrafish, but the zebrafish model for fear is if it doesn't move as much or something like that. So if you make a zebrafish frightened, it stays still, exactly. But there are other interesting types of emotional behavior, and again, the emotional facial expression behavior includes all the characteristic facial expressions. Okay, so I spoke to Angie and to Jessica Turner months ago about my desire to annotate or to create annotations from the emotional ontology to the BrainMap database, but I still haven't actually got that annotation database going. So that's I hope will be within the next really short few months. But the idea will be that based on the study task, which is already described very well in the cognitive paradigm ontology, we will be able to just make a very simple annotation to the emotional ontology saying what the patient was doing at the time that they were undergoing the study. So based on the instructions they were given, what our best guess that they were actually doing. And this would be to things, to terms in the ontology such as visual perception of angry face pictures, or auditory perception of shouting or screaming voices, or remembering a sad life event. And with those annotations in place, we'll be able to basically link up the mental functioning ontology to, I hope, everything, at least everything of relevance for affective science research in a simple fashion. They would be able to be aggregated from the perspective of the emotion, mental function that the subjects were undergoing. So, and then the other thing which is ongoing at the moment is linking up the emotion ontology to its biochemical basis. And that really means just annotating the chemicals and biological processes that are involved in various different emotions, such as, of course, neurotransmitters and the like. So that's just the fact that one of the objectives for the project is to get a good way to link up chemicals to things that they do. And KEBI and GO, so that's KEBI and the gene ontology, are already aligned and integrated, so all chemical references in the gene ontology are linked to the correct chemical in KEBI already. So that's really useful for taking this to the next level, because then linking up the gene ontology to the emotion ontology or any other aspect of mental functioning immediately gives you the link to the chemicals downstream. Yep, and we would want to do the same for the disorders. So we want to link the disorder to the underlying or aspects of the underlying process. Of course, this is always just a partial perspective, firstly because we don't know everything about the bases of these disorders, and secondly, because even the gene ontology itself doesn't have everything in it, so we would only want to be able to pull out what could reasonably be pulled out. So we could get to the genes that have been annotated with downregulation of dopaminergic system from depression without having to add a whole lot of synonyms in gene ontology, because we have that cross-ontology link. Okay, so that's all I needed to say. Basically, there's a slide here which has the actual links to the ontology files and the mailing lists. If you want to berate me after the meeting publicly, then that's how you would do it. And I want to say thank you to everybody who's contributed to the project, especially the people in Buffalo and in Geneva, and at or around the EBI, and to Jess and Angela for discussions about BringMap. So, and thank you all for listening. How do I take questions, Anita? I'm going to switch this off now. Do I have a set of organism relationships to the emotions? So by that, do you mean model organisms? Do you mean the kind of that people test for emotions in model organisms?
Yeah, actually, that's the sort of thing. So it would be, okay, so for example, all primates, as far as we can tell, have a full recognition of the 5 basic emotions. So it's the happiness, fear,
Yeah.
etc. And the whole level of primates. It would you could also argue that dogs can show happiness.
Yeah.
But there are many other species which have been shown to have these emotions. So I'm wondering if I am interpreting data for a rat or a mouse, because what you didn't mention in this webinar is how do the species actually feel?
Yeah.
And so this is really what my question is about, and I'm happy to also have others ask questions, but this is what I'm really
Okay, so one of the ways that we see species fitting in is simply where the ontology annotation takes place. If a particular model organism database is meeting the ontology, then we'd work out the cross-links between that animal's behavior and the ontology and make those cross-ontology or cross-database relationships. But, so the question is, how do we link up species and represent knowledge about which emotions take place in other different species? And so my answer was that one part of the picture would be annotation, but I think also another probably more interesting, or at least as interesting, part of the picture would be to put constraints, taxon constraints they're called in the gene ontology, onto the actual emotion terms themselves. So we could say that something, for example, pride is probably something which there aren't many animals that have, that we can assess that they have something, because either it's because it's too difficult to assess, or because it's too complex, really, cognitively, for many animals to have. So we would want to say, well, something like pride or a few of the others are only happening in humans as a constraint. But it's not done yet.
But that would be that I think that question, because I think that would allow for us to query more effectively for the emotions.
Yeah. I think it's a very, very good idea. I'm taking notes. So Nita said that having constraints on the ontology about which emotions can happen in which species would be a very useful way